Samson Raphael Hirsch on resentment. Nitra, chapter 18, paragraph 29. And it begins with a quote from Vayikra Leviticus, which is chapter 19, verse 18. Let me just get it here. And so we have it in context. In English, it's, "Nor bear any grudge against the children of thy people." So where is that? Yeah. Okay. So it's interesting because we've dealt with some of this previously. The paragraph begins, "You shall not be a gossip monger among your people. You shall not stand aside while your fellow's blood is shed. I am Hashem. You shall not hate your brother in your heart." We also did this section. "You shall rebuke your fellow, and do not bear a sin because of him. You shall not take," and here we are, "you shall not take revenge, and you shall not bear a grudge against the members of your people. You shall love your fellow as yourself. I am Hashem." So this is it's a very important concept that not only do we not take revenge, but we don't bear a grudge. And really, this has two parts to it. One is your action with your fellow man, and the other is your action with yourself. That if you're a person who has vengeance in their mind, right, it poisons your everyday, right? If you have resentment, if you're bearing a grudge, you know, a person who lives next to a neighbor who he doesn't get along with, it's a terrible situation, right? And what can it come from? It can come from the fact that you're sharing a lawn and your neighbor came out one day and he raked the leaves only on his side of the lawn, right? Or you raked the leaves on your side of the lawn and his leaves blew to your side of the lawn, right? So it's enough to like turn people hateful to each other forever, right? Which is bizarre when you think about it, because if you'd said, "Gee, the next time you do it, could you like do the whole lawn, and when I do it, I'll do the whole lawn," right? All the problems would be solved. Right? But instead it's, what kind of person is that who lets his leaves blow into my lawn, right? And you can get crazy over it. So the idea of not taking revenge and not bearing a grudge is not so much what you do to the other person, but it's actually, especially with bearing a grudge, what you're doing to yourself, because that's something that can be very internal. You may never actually express it to the other person. You may just feel nasty towards the other person. Let's see what Hirsch says. Rav Hirsch says, "Leave no room in your memory for wrong or insult which you may have suffered. Even though you may not have desired to act in that spirit immediately, quickly replace in your heart the love which your brother himself may have frightened away from it. However he may have behaved towards you, retain for him the love which God requires of you as for his child, God's child, and which you owe to your brother, not merely as repayment for your life. If your brother has wronged you in your property, forget it at once, even if he has not asked you to do so." It's an interesting, it's an interesting point. Is that because what is property? Right? We'll come to it. What he took was not yours, and he did not take anything from you. He can't actually take something that is really yours. You can only take something that's not really yours. You may feel it's yours. Where injury has been done to your person or honor, be easily appeased as soon as your brother asks for forgiveness and desires to be reconciled. He who soon forgives is soon forgiven. We're all going to be judged. And midah keneged midah, measure for measure, how we judge others, we will be judged. You know, one day, Rabbi Yitzchak of Radishev, he was noted for his sukkah was open to everybody always. And it was filled with, you know, some of the most brilliant religious leaders of the time who would come to sit, you know, and learn with Rabbi Yitzchak. But also some people who, you know, hardly ever came to shul, and they were not particularly respectful. And one day, one of his chassidim said, "Rebbe, how can you fill your sukkah with these kinds of people?" And he said, "You know, after I'm 120, I will come to the great sukkah." Right? Sukkah of Mashiach. And they will say, who are you, Levi Yitzchak? That you think you belong in a sukkah with Moshe Rabbeinu? With David HaMelech? With Aaron HaKohen? With Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov? You think you belong here? And I will say to them, perhaps I don't have that merit. But judge me as I judge the people in my life. People who maybe didn't have such merit either. They were always welcome with me. So judge me in accordance with that. Not on my merit, but in how I judged others. And by the way, we're going to come to this later. Dama Kafsku, judge others kindly. So, but the point that Rav Hirsch makes here is the point that, he who forgives is soon forgiven. Right? If you are really good, if you are an anav, if humility is one of your qualities, you will forget hurts and insults without pardon even being asked of you. Like the well-known chassid, who will never lie down to sleep without being reconciled with the whole world, all of which God covers with the wings of peace. In this point, one of the points he's making is to be an anav, to be a humble person, right? And we're just talking about resentment and how to avoid resentment, and that resentment should be avoided, right? And in it, Rav Hirsch says one of the keys to avoiding resentment is humility. That very often we resent things because of who we think we should be and how we should be respected. And he brings Moshe Rabbeinu as an example of somebody who it was fairly hard to insult him, and so Lord knows the Jewish people tried over and over to do so. But his humility prohibited him from that kind of resentment. It's an interesting thing because, there were two great thinkers, philosophical thinkers that we sometimes compare. One of them being Rambam, Maimonides, and the other being Aristotle. And they both sought what was called the golden mean. Right? So, let's say courage is a quality a person has. Right? On one extreme, a person can be recklessly courageous, endangering his own life and the lives of people around him. And the other side, he can be so timid that people are damaged by it. So both Rambam and Aristotle would say you should find somewhere in the middle, right? Where you have the courage of your convictions, but you're not, a crazy person about what you're doing, and you're not doing it just for the sake of the excitement of it. Right? And in describing the golden mean, Aristotle says that one of the defining qualities of it is to be proud of your behavior, right? That your behavior is ennobling and you can take pride in your actions, right? This was an Aristotelian way of judging, am I in the golden mean? Am I proud of how I behave? Rambam, Maimonides, who was in many ways an Aristotelian, who was very interested in the philosophical views of Aristotle, differed from him on this. He said the golden mean is humility, right? To understand whatever gifts you have, right, come from a greater place, and the issue is how you use them. Right? So one would have humility about one's accomplishments rather than pride in them. And this was a big difference between the two as philosophical thinkers. Right? So in this, the idea of humility is something that comes up as a very important quality in a Jew. Now, humility is often misunderstood, and we've talked about this before when we were talking about an anav previously. There's a kind of false humility, right? Gee, I'm not good enough to do that. Right? It's humility where you can use it for avoidance. Right? I don't deserve to do that. I'm not qualified to do that. Whatever. Right? There's a humility that is a sense of worthlessness. I'm a worthless person. But when we talk of an Anav, the model of an Anav is Moshe Rabbeinu himself. It says, the Torah says of his qualities that he was the humblest of all men. Right? But if you read the qualities of Moshe Rabbeinu, they're not somebody who is, I can't do this, I'm self-effacing. He was a real doer. He argued with God, right? So that's kind of chutzpah in a way, to argue with God, right? If you destroy these people, take me out of your book, right? Doesn't sound very humble, right? But what humility means is not a degradation of your own value and your own things, but an understanding of where your talents come from. Right? So Moshe Rabbeinu, people say, might have said in describing his humility, not that I am without talent, not that I am without intelligence, not that I am without privilege. He was born a Levite. Right? I have all those things. He says to Korach, you have to be a Kohen? You're already a Levite. You should be pleased. Right? So he was aware of all of these things. Right? But he understood that these were gifts to him. Right? And so the question was how he used the gifts. Right? It wasn't, am I intelligent? Intelligence came from God. How do I use it? Right? So at the end, you can't be, there are different kinds of pride days, right? There's Gay Pride Day, there's Jewish Pride Day, there's Columbus Day for the Italians in New York, right? There's a whole series of different, there's St. Patrick's Day, which is an Irish Pride Day. So, what is Jewish pride? It's a kind of curious thing. I mean, somebody who converts to Judaism, that's maybe a very understandable form of Jewish pride. You make the effort to do it. But for me to be proud to be Jewish, I'm proud that my mother was Jewish. It's like 10-finger Pride Day. I'm proud that I have 10 fingers. I'm going to march in a parade. Right? No, it doesn't make sense, right? So, being an Anav, having humility, right, is an understanding that the pride in my 10 fingers it was a gift from God that I had the 10 fingers, right? So the question is, what do I do with them? What do I do with my Jewishness? What do I do with the gifts that I'm given? Right? But to take pride in the gifts themselves is an inflated sense of self, and it endangers you in terms of dealing with other people, because you think, I am this, right? I am proud to be 6'4". Right? It doesn't make sense. Right? But people are that way about things that are not so obviously physical. Their intelligence, right? They can be very proud of their intelligence, right? But is their intelligence any different than their height? I'm not sure it is. I think it's how you're using it is the issue. So, and this pride in these things very often leads to anger and resentment to other people, because you feel inflated by these qualities and somebody degrades them and you take it very personally, right? Whereas the only person or the only entity that should be insulted by this maybe is God. I gave him these qualities and someone's degrading them. It's not nice. They're my gifts. Right? For the person who has them, it's not appropriate to react. So Hirsch comes down at the end of this to saying, your forgiveness must be real and complete, so that no trace of rancor remains in you, anger remains in you. It must be a genuine restoration of the old brotherly love. What has happened must be really obliterated. Do not deceive yourself. It is so easy not to perform this duty. And I think we all know this. If left to itself, the mind long remembers insults and injuries, even after forgiveness has been asked and even after repatriation has been made of any wrongdoing. It goes on saying, how could a man behave to me in such a way? You can't let go of it. It's like a dog with a bone. We can never be the same friends again. And so a feud goes on for generations, separating those whom God would wish to see united. I said sometimes you have a neighbor, right? And they'll rake half of the lawn, right? their half of the lawn, but not your half, right? And then, you know, they can, or the reverse. You rake half the lawn and their leaves blow onto your lawn, right? You know, your children can end up hating their children because of this incident, right? It's so crazy, right? But very often it happens, you know. Not so you, the Jew, the Israelite. Your God requires you to forget, therefore forget. Practice this duty, start it, and it will come easy to you. It is never difficulty if you have anav, humility, in you. You know, when we go to bed at night, right, there's a Shema we say, the nighttime Shema. Yeah? So, I just want to look at it for 1 second, if you don't mind, because it's very interesting how this begins. And, you know, a lot of us fall asleep before we actually get this said. But it's not a bad idea to have a consciousness of it. In the Art Scroll book, it is on page Bedtime Shema, after counting the Omer. It begins on page 289. It says, Rabboni Shalom, Master of the Universe, I hereby forgive anyone who angered or antagonized me, or who sinned against me, whether against my body, my property, my honor, against anything of mine, whether he did so accidentally or willfully, carelessly or purposely, whether through speech or deed or notion, whether in this transgression or in another, whether in this transmigration or in another, regardless of which level of the soul he's in. Right? I forgive every Jew. May no man be punished because of me. May it be your will, Hashem, my God, and the God of my forefathers, that I may sin no more. Whatever sins I have done before you, may you blot out with your abundant mercies, but not through suffering or bad illness. May the expressions of my mouth and the thoughts of my heart find favor before you, Hashem, my rock and my redeemer. So before we go to bed that night, we have a consciousness of two things. One is regretting any sins that we could have committed, but also wanting to say, God, don't punish somebody on my account. And, you know, I'm not looking for that. Now, this is a tremendously admirable quality. I'm not sure that all of us succeed at this. I know for sure one person at the table who doesn't, right, and has to work at it. Right? It's myself. You know, you sometimes people do things that you feel are intentionally hurt you, and to rise above it is not so easy. But Hirsch's point is that it requires practice, that you have to make the effort to do it. And with time you'll get better at it. And at the end, the benefit of this process is not the other guy. It's all about you. It's all about avoiding ulcers. You know, my father used to say that in this world, everybody said in this world there's two kinds of people, right? My father, blessed memory, always used to say there's two kinds of people. Those people who get ulcers and those people who give ulcers. Don't get them, right? You know, and the only way not to get them is to be an honor, is to say, you can't defend my honor because my honor is not an issue to me. My honor is something that comes from God, right? And that you can't hurt. Next one, we're in the process of just finishing the last two things before we get into section 2. So we'll move along here, which is listening to evil, lashon hara. Right? Do not listen to malicious talk. It comes from, this comes from, thou shalt not give ear to empty talk, from Exodus. And just let's look at the, what is it?
23:1.
23:1. Okay. So the parsha begins, Lo tisha shma. Do not accept a false report. Do not extend your hand with the wicked to be a venal witness, to be a false witness. Do not be a follower of the majority for evil. Do not respond to a grievance by yielding to the majority to pervert the law. So that's the context of it. Right? But his point here is, again, these are all closely related, these last few midos, right? Mm-hmm. Do not listen to malicious talk which tells you something derogatory about your brother or sister. If you have listened to it, which you shouldn't do, but if you have listened to it, do not accept it so far as to let it have the slightest effect on your love and esteem for your brother or sister. You should assume that what you're hearing is not accurate. Right? That when somebody is a gossip monger, right, that itself is such a sin that if they're telling you that Reuben is a sinner, right, their sin is derisive. It's a Torah derisive that they're spreading. Right? Mm-hmm. And I know the question you're going to get to. What if they're doing it for your own protection? We're going to get to that in a second. And there are a lot of rules that the Chofetz Chaim writes about to define whether negative speech has a place. It does have a place, but it's very narrow. And it doesn't involve any of the joy that gossip usually involves. You know, gossip is a very kind of pleasurable experience. I think we all know that. You know that your brother can have committed no crime so great, that which the talebearer is committing at this moment. And though he is in other respects most worthy of your esteem, at this moment he stands before you as a miscreant, the person who's talking to you. Right? You must not listen to him, much less give the slightest credence to his talk. For if you listen to him and take in what he says, then you make yourself a partner to his crime, and as our sages point out, incur an even greater guilt. Somebody who partners with somebody in a crime, facilitates it, in many ways is more guilty than the person who originates it. For if men pledge themselves not to listen to Lashon Hara, to evil talk, the evil speakers would cease of themselves. There's a pleasure in telling you something about somebody else, right? And there's a pleasure of you hearing this inside information, you know, as we do it, right? When you remove that pleasure, right, you remove the desire to do it. Right? Thus, it is by listening to evil talk that you make tale-bearing possible. And if you give credence to it and let it affect your attitude to the person who has been slandered, then you complete the crime of the slanderer. For you bring to ripeness the seed of hatred which he tried to sow. He had an intention of lifting himself up and casting somebody else down. And by listening and giving it credence, right, you're actually doing exactly what his goal was. And if you did not withdraw love and esteem from the victim, the crime of the slanderer would evaporate in the attempt and would remain unfinished. He would have failed at what he was doing. If you're warned of designs which someone has on your property, on your honor, on your happiness, your life, prudence, remember this is Hirsch now, he's saying it's not a blanket rule, there are exceptions. In such a case, prudence demands that you should guard yourself as if it were true. But go on thinking, esteeming, and loving as if it were completely false. This is required by love and justice, which according to God's commandment you owe to your neighbor, even in your mind and your heart. So let's say someone were to say to you, I don't think the person you're about to employ is a trustworthy person. Now, why are they saying it to you? Are they saying it to you for your benefit? Then it should pain them to say it. They should really not want to say it, and it should be difficult and painful for them to say it. And what should your actions be? Should you then decide, I'm not going to employ the person? Halachically, that isn't the answer. Halachically, you shouldn't accept that statement as an accurate witness position. It's Lashon Hara. But it means that you have to have a consciousness that maybe there's a slight possibility the person's correct, so I will stay focused on the issues involved. So, if I have money in a drawer, I might lock the drawer, right? Or if I have something of value that I'm concerned might, be misused, right? Then I would count it at the end of the day. Right? But I would not assume that the person that I'm dealing with is a dishonest person just because I'm told that. Now, how much more so if you know the person is a gossipmonger? Many years ago, I wanted to do a film about an extremely wealthy family who had built a major construction project in England. And I thought they were wonderful people, very charitable, very special people. But they didn't want to be involved with the project, the film project. And it wasn't an investigative film that was going to make them look bad at all. And I asked them why. I didn't actually ask them, I asked their lawyer why, because he was the one who said no. And he said, well, my clients, you're right, they're very wealthy and very powerful people, but A, they're modest, and B, they know what your business is. And I said, what's my business? And they said, you're in the business of Lashon Hara. You're a journalist. You're in the business of, because Lashon Hara is not defined as saying a falsehood. Right?
It just means saying anything.
It means, first of all, primarily saying something negative about a person. But by the way, you can even spread Lashon Hara by saying something positive. When you're introducing somebody who's going to be a speaker, if you overdo the introduction, it is a kind of Lashon Hara, because it sets people up to resent the guy who's about to speak. He's this, he's this, he's this, he's this. Right? And generally, sometimes people will give you very long resumes, and the person doing the introduction reads the whole resume. And, everybody's irritated with the guy before he begins speaking. Right? And that's a form of Lashon Hara too. Right? So Lashon Hara is creating a negative atmosphere about somebody. And you should be very, very careful not to listen to it and not to give it credence. Yes?
Ostriker, how do you respond to Lashon Hara if someone's saying it and you want to say, I don't want to listen to it without being rude?
Well, first of all, that's not a bad thing to say. Right? I have a friend who jokingly will say to you, look, I don't like to repeat Lashon Hara, so listen carefully to what I'm going to say now. But certainly in our own community, right? Everybody understands that Lashon Hara is an inappropriate form of behavior. It doesn't mean that they can stop themselves from doing it. We don't seem to have a lot of problem with stopping ourselves from murder, theft, some of the major crimes, right? But the crime of gossip seems to be something that we really struggle with. And really you're doing your friend a favor if you say, it's better, if you're trying to teach me a lesson about what's happened, right? Then don't give me the names of the people involved. Just tell me the story, right? I can learn from the story. But if you're going to start, I think the popular term is dissing, right? But if you're going to start, saying negative things about people, it's not really something that I want to hear. And by the way, the most popular time of doing this is usually during the repetition of Shemona Esrei.
Yeah.
People start to get into conversations,
talking
in shul, on Shabbos, during the repetition of Shemona Esrei. They got nothing else to do to say, hey, you see what that guy is? Tell you something about it?
Yeah.
So to say, I don't think this is an appropriate conversation for me, is usually enough to put an end to it, and there isn't resentment. About the Chofetz Chaim, people thought, he was so careful. He wrote a number of long books on the subject of speech, right? That he probably didn't speak at all. The truth is he was speaking constantly, but not Lashon Hara. The easiest way to avoid Lashon Hara is not to be speaking about individuals, but to be speaking about ideas, concepts, certainly Torah.
Mayor Ford is now in court for
Lashon Hara.
Exactly.
Information.
Exactly.
Yeah.
By the way, if somebody is a public figure and they're in the press, you can't talk about them. It's an interesting thing. That if somebody's already in the newspapers, right? If you want to talk about, the behavior of General Petraeus, right? It doesn't fall under the category of Lashon Hara because it's known he's a public figure and he's chosen that life, right?
Which opens him up to be able to discuss it.
So he's not protected by the rules of Lashon Hara. You yourself might be, unwise to speak about it, even though it's permitted, because many of these things are things about what midos you're developing in yourself, right? So it is a lesson to learn about the behavior of General Petraeus. Can you learn that lesson without mentioning who he is? Maybe not. I don't know. It's possible that you can't. And he's chosen the role he's chosen, so it goes with it. We're not really into paparazzi, but at the same time, Lashon Hara about people in the public world is acceptable.
It's crazy now with the paparazzi. That's probably why Lashon Hara is so, because there's entire magazines there.
Well, it's an industry.
Yeah, an industry.
Lashon Hara is one of the biggest industries in the world.
Yeah.
It's reality TV. It's built on Lashon Hara.
Yeah.
The Survivor series, all this stuff about 8 people on the island, and I don't like this guy because I don't like that guy. It's juicy, and that's why they do it. Okay, last one in this section. Nice way to end, actually. Going on with Don Lakufskus, judging one's neighbor favorably. And this is from Vayikra, Leviticus, and it says, "In righteousness shalt thou judge thy neighbor." And it is... Which one is it?
It's 14:15.
14:15. Chapter 14.
Chapter 14, verse 15.
Okay.
In righteousness shalt thou judge.
You shall not... okay, so... 14, 15?
14, verse 14.
Verse 14.
Chapter 14, verse 15.
Chapter 14. Chapter 19. That's chapter 19.
19, sorry.
Chapter 19, verse 15, right?
Yes, sorry.
You shall not commit a perversion of justice. You shall not favor the poor, right? You shall not favor the poor, and you shall not honor the great. With righteousness shall you judge your fellow. So this is... This would seem to be directed towards judges, right? There is a temptation to say, I have 2 people in front of me, one is wealthy, one is poor, they're litigants in a case, so, I'm not going to be sympathetic to Donald Trump. Right? I'm going to be sympathetic to the poor schlep who he took advantage of. That's very wrong.
Yeah.
You have to judge, when you're dealing with, as a judge, on the merits of the case. At the same time, you can't say, this is a nuisance case. He knows that Donald Trump is very wealthy, so he's just going after him, because Trump will settle, and that'll be it. So, I'm not, and by the way, it's not a bad thing to rule in favor of Donald Trump.
Yeah. Well, he doesn't deserve to have millions of people.
So here the Torah is saying it doesn't. You have to judge. Justice in this case is blind to your social status. That's what it's saying. But this is not what Hirsch says. The obligations which this command imposes on a judge, on a dayan, belong to mishpatim, right? A different place in a different chapter in the Sefer Torah. Here we shall derive from it an important duty for everyone and for everyday life. Why are we so quick to judge our neighbor? On the strength of a mere rumor, without hearing the man himself, without first calmly considering all the possibilities, we cast the stone of guilt against our neighbor and kill in our hearts the esteem and love to which he's entitled. This was a tremendous quality of really the greats of Israel. The whole idea of Moshe Rabbeinu, or Avraham Avinu, right? We condemn Noah for this, by the way, because Noah did not choose to look for the good. He said, okay, God, you're going to destroy the world.
Yeah.
Me and my family will continue to do what you say, right? And our neighbors, they didn't learn how to swim. What can I say? But Abraham said, you can't destroy the innocent with the guilty.
Yeah,
Don't do it, right?
He argued.
And he argued and argued and argued, right? Moshe Rabbeinu said, if you do this thing, take my name out, right? Again, so this idea of trying to find the good. In our own time, I often think of, we mentioned this quite recently, Levi Yitzhak of Berdichev, who is one of my favorite Hasidic leaders. And his great strength was that he would always see the good in others. If he saw people talking in shul, he would never do it. But if he saw, and then when it came to time to daven, he would say, look, Rabbanu Shalom, master of the worlds, how your children love you. They interrupt their business to pray to you. Well, the rest of us would be saying, why are they talking in shul? They're not supposed to talk in shul. The Shulchan Aruch says not to talk, right? But he's saying, look, they'll interrupt their business just to pray to you, right? There's a famous story of him on Tisha B'Av, that he ran into a young fellow on Tisha B'Av. It's a fast day. It's the one day of deep mourning in the Jewish calendar. And the guy was sitting there eating a sandwich. And Levi Yitzhak of Berdichev came to him and he said, my friend, perhaps you didn't know that it was Tisha B'Av. And he said, no, I knew it was Tisha B'Av. He said, you knew it was Tisha B'Av, and you know that Tisha B'Av is a fast day. Yeah, Tisha B'Av is a fast day. But you're eating a sandwich. Yeah, I'm eating a sandwich. Of course, the Torah permits, if you're not well, you shouldn't fast. So I guess you're probably not feeling very well, and I hope that you recover soon, that you have a complete recovery, and that you go on to a healthy life. I said, I can't lie to you. I'm completely healthy. Rabbanu Shalom. In spite of the penalties in life, your children will not lie to you. This was always seeing the positive, in somebody who looked for this moment. Right? We should do the same,
The second one.
We're on the second?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Why are we so quick to... No, we did this already. The third one, I think. 138?
Yeah. Okay.
Not, however, if you pay proper heed to this injunction, you will retain your good opinion of your neighbor unimpaired until his guilt is irrefutably proved and shown to admit no excuse. Nay, even if you see him sin with your own eyes, this is Levi Yitzchak, or if credible witnesses testify to his guilt, you are not to judge. For you, justice in this case means love. And in this love, he finds the most trusty advocate who excuses his act wherever possible, or at least looks for mitigating circumstances. Be circumspect in judgment. Take always the more favorable view. These are utterances of Chazal, our sages, which assure life and welfare. And even if you have been deceived sevenfold, even if you have made a mistake 100 times, yet never depart from this rule of judgment. Better that 100 should be judged too favorably than one should be wronged in judgment. You may never be able to forgive yourself for having judged even a single man too harshly in your thoughts. And of course, the great importance of this lesson, which we said earlier, is mita keneged mita, the measure for measure. How you judge, you should expect to be judged yourself. Right? And I think that this is enough of a concern that any of us would be very cautious about judging harshly. we talk about Baruch Dayan Emes, that God is a fair judge. God is not a fair judge at all. God really doesn't believe very much in justice. God believes in mercy. Because if God did create the world with justice, and we say that He created worlds with justice prior to this world, that they couldn't survive. Because does anybody know anybody who has not fallen? It says a tzaddik falls 7 times and gets up again. Right? That this is the nature of life. Right? So, we might not make it to the end of the day if everything was about justice. So we should be careful, how we judge others. I wanted, before we get into the parsha, just to take a moment, because one of the things that's nice to do about Rav Hirsch is to kind of get to know him personally a little bit. And so I copied an introduction to a biography of Adam. And it kind of gives you his nature, his contradictory nature, and what's so appealing about him. So let me just read the first couple pages of it. Historically, biographies of Torah luminaries have been very rare. By the way, this is something that's changed in the last 25, 30 years. Is that, well, part of it is because so many people come to Torah not from their childhood today. They come as Bali Tshuva, that we look for a lot of sources of inspiration. Historically, biographies of Torah luminaries have been rare. When these words were studied in the base medrash and practiced in daily life, they were alive and needed no memorial. It was only with the decline of Torah study that biography has become a medium through which to inspire the study of their works and the emulation of their deeds. If you don't have role models, they become role models. Dwelling on the history of one's people and its heroes, Rav Hirsch asserted, is a sign of the spiritually infirm present. Right? He spent so much time saying, if you don't know where you come from, you don't know where you're going. This was not Hirsch's view, actually. One must examine whether this is from Hirsch. One must examine whether the study of the history and of the past events is necessary or even useful for men and nations whose present life is completely taken up with vigorous and active devotion to their duty. Only generations in a state of decline feel they must look back to the past in order to be uplifted by the example of long-departed heroes. For individuals and nations that live as they should, the immediate present will always be their focus. Live in the moment. They know what they must do now. Their minds and energies are so completely and enthusiastically taken up with their immediate duties that they do not feel the need nor have the time to look back for inspiration. Their search for knowledge will center primarily on one question: where does our duty lie, and what is our task right now? Sounds like a German Jew to me. He's a real Yekka. Where does our duty lie, and what is our task right now? Such individuals and nations understand that for them, the answer to these questions will not be provided by a study or the deeds and fortunes of their ancestors. They know that they can find the answer to their questions only in the law of God that has been handed to their own generation, and it will be handed by God Himself to all generations yet to come in the same ever-new, direct manner that was given to the very first generation that witnessed revelation with its own eyes. Right? This is a concept that is built into Yiddishkeit, that when we talk about receiving the Torah, we don't talk about receiving it then, we talk about receiving it on a daily basis. And that the Torah should always be fresh for us and apply specifically to us. If a biography of Rabbi Hirsch is to be justified in its own terms, then it must demonstrate that he belongs not to the past but to the present, and his ideals and the manner in which he put them into practice throughout his long and eventful life still illuminate and instruct today. Any account of his life which does not serve as a guide for living is an epitaph of dubious value, not a living testament. Our position today in Western society is essentially the same as that of German Jewry in Rabbi Hirsch's time.
Oh, yeah.
The answers he provided to the challenge of an open society and the course he charted remain equally cogent today, when the conditions which first gave rise to the challenges that characterize so much of the Jewish world. Thus, a study of his active and influential life can help us to respond to practical issues facing the Jew and the world today. At the same time, no profile of Rabbi Hirsch can ever take the place of a serious, sustained study of his voluminous works. This book, meaning the biography, is an attempt to describe how Rabbi Hirsch put the principles enunciated in his writings into practice. 19th century European society opened its doors to the Jew. For the first time since the Karaites, back to the Second Temple era, non-observance as an organized movement, this is very important, as an organized movement, complete with leaders, ideology, and literature, became a reality in Jewish life. Rabbi Hirsch was the first European gadol to set forth a comprehensive Torah response to institutionalized heresy. Right?
This is not Judaism.
That is to say that what he was confronted with was not new interpretations of the law, but a sense that the law was not binding on people. The divine law is not binding on people. This is heresy. Yeah? Besides formulating both a theoretical and a practical response to the Reform movement, he discredited the science of Judaism, the forerunner of today's conservative movement, and its recasting of Judaism into a cultural experience. Yeah? With his Torah im derech eretz principle, that is to say, Torah and the world, Torah in the world and of the world, right, not separated from it. He ensured Torah's absolute domination of every aspect of life, even in modern conditions. The Kehillah he built in Frankfurt became a model for Jewish communal life and was a focal point of Torah Judaism in Germany. The school he founded in Frankfurt remains the prototype for much of today's Orthodox education of girls. And by the way, it was the inspiration for Beis Yaakov.
Wow. He basically does it all.
His lucid definition of the meaning of exile and the place of Eretz Yisrael in our time remains the approach of the bulk of Torah Jewry to these issues. The organization he created to promote and represent Orthodox Jewry in Germany was the direct forerunner of Agudath Yisrael. His books and writings exert a powerful influence until this day, with new volumes and editions published yearly. His commentaries on the Torah and Tehillim, Psalms, continue to exercise a powerful sway over the hearts and minds of our people and to draw strange brethren back to the fold. Rabbi Hirsch responded to the dangers of assimilation and non-observance not with anathema, not with imprecation, but rather with a reasoned and convincing presentation of the eternal truths of Judaism. His portrayal of the sublime beauty of sanctity-filled Jewish life and the uplifting power of Judaism grants it its adherents remains unparalleled. An account of his life, then, is not an arid piece of scholarship, but a vital guidebook to life itself. 2 years before Rabbi Hirsch passed on to the next world, he explained the statement of Chazal from Pirkei Avos. The statement comes from chapter 2, Mishnah 5. Do not say of any word that it cannot possibly be heard, for in the end it will be heard. And Hirsch explains what this meant. Even if you should be the only person in your community to hold a given view, do not say that you will never be able to gain a hearing from the other members of the community. As long as the view you represent is truly right and aims only at what is good and true, do not refrain from expressing it. Continue your fight, tirelessly and undaunted, for what is good and right, for years if need be. In the end, provided, of course, that you have fought for your cause solely for its own sake. and without ulterior and selfish motives, you will be heard. He was. So it's a little bit about the man himself.